Welcome to Drinks with Defenders. I'm Addie B. Plate.
And I'm Kayla Murphy. We're two law school friends turned criminal defense attorneys turned podcast hosts.
We're here in this space because we now work in separate offices and miss collaborating with each other.
We've been talking about creating a podcast for years where we talk about the complexities of the criminal justice system, the aspects of it that we grapple with, and the importance of what we do.
At the end of a long work week, we want to sit down, have a drink with each other, and talk about the rabbit holes of criminal defense, just like we always have. So let's get into it. Cheers! The best place to start is kind of the beginning. And so if you have stumbled upon this, you are interested in why you're here and what this is about. My name is Addie B. Plate. I am a criminal defense attorney in Idaho. I practice a lot of different areas of the law as a public defender here. And this is the podcast I have called Drinks with Defenders with one of my friends. And we talk about what we do and why we like criminal defense. And we have a themed drink every time we do. And this is a passion project we've been working on and kind of dreaming about for almost 6 years. And that's what to expect here. It's two people who really care about their jobs and have wanted to just have some space where we can just catch up, have a drink, and geek out about what we have always loved and why we're choosing this work and go down rabbit holes about things that we like and find interesting. Aside from my job, I'm just a person who likes to read the news and hang out with my friends who live all over the country now because most of them I met while in law school, do outdoor activities. I was a college soccer athlete. That was not it. I was a soccer player before I was ever an attorney, so I still like sports. I don't know why that's relevant, but I'm talking about myself right now. And yeah, this is it. We decided to finally do this, and I think it's finally the right time. And so, to that, being the person that starts isn't easy. So, hop on in whenever you want to.
No, it's not easy, and it's just one of the many hard things that you've accomplished recently. And I'm proud of you. You're a freaking bad. My name's Kayla Murphy. I'm 29 years old. I'm a criminal defense attorney in Central Washington. I practice at a private firm, although my firm does take on some public defense contracts. So I am certainly familiar with public defense practice as well as private practice. I have been married to my husband for 10 years. We met in school. Speaking of high school, I barely graduated. I had like a 1.7 GPA. Never thought that I would actually be like a successful person. I didn't have very high expectations of myself. So yeah, I'm happy to be here today and to help, hopefully inspire other young troubled kids who are flunking out of school to know that, something Georgia Hardstark from My Favorite Murder says. She always says, like, bigger dummies than you, right? Bigger dummies than us. And I've just really internalized that. And like Addie, I'm sure we'll get into this as we go through these episodes and talk more about kind of our day-to-day practice as attorneys. But it's like bigger dummies than us. You know what I mean?
I work in North Idaho in a public defender's office. And as part of that, I practice a few different areas of law. I get to do some family law. I get to do some civil stuff, misdemeanor practice, involuntary commitments. It's a mixed bag. And I love that about why I chose the office that I work in. I recently became an attorney. So I graduated from law school this past year. I was a bit of a non-traditional law student. It took me longer to complete law school. I passed the bar with flying colors. So when people tell you that if you have a hard time in law school, you're going to have a hard time on the bar, I'm here to tell you that that's not true. Really why I'm here is I love the idea of representing people who kind of get put through the system. And I, as a public defender, have really taken that to heart. I wake up every day and I get to just be around people who I think aren't that different than me, who just have had a series of events that have led them to our paths crossing. I guess a good place to start too is like the most inspirational thing that has happened in court last couple of weeks was I had a judge today tell somebody that the best place to start is accepting that you're human and go from there. And so that's part of this podcast. I think it's just kind of adding a take to perceiving the world from the point of living in it and practicing in it. And so we're here to talk about our jobs that we've chosen. I'm a lawyer by practice and a public defender by choice. Aside from that, I went to law school in Oregon with one of my friends who I have this podcast with, and she practices in Washington. I moved to Idaho. My dad's from here. I grew up in Utah and I didn't want to move back there or practice law there. And I enjoy the fact that I get to practice in a state that I work in a public defender's office that goes against 3 different prosecuting offices with our county and cities that I represent, that are the communities that I represent. Kayla, we made this podcast together. It's been 7 years since we met? No, 6 years since we met.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't have the opportunity to do that in law school. And before we get there, I think it's important to point out that we're not doing this alone. So part of why this is now happening is that we have finally help and time and resources and experience to bring to having a podcast where we talk about public defense. So on the podcast, we have our law clerk and our law clerk. And other than that, it's just going to be the 2 of us getting into what we do. So cheers. As I said, we sit here and we drink drinks and talk about the law. So if you were game for that, then this might be a good landing spot for you. So let's back up. So we now practice. Kayla, how long have you been practicing for?
About 2 years.
Right.
Yeah.
And were a new attorney in the thick of it with COVID, and now you're returning to like the new normal again of being back in court and all of that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, our courts have permitted like Zoom now, which has been really nice. That's a great change. Also, I think that they used to just have like all of the people on the calendars just for like one time, right? Like this is the afternoon calendar. But now that, COVID happened, it seems like there are like assigning people for specific times. And it's basically just making things not as chaotic. I really appreciate the changes.
We tried to make a podcast in law school, and admittedly, it did not go well, like at all. We tried. I think it's important for people to kind of understand like where this idea started from. And I think it's really important to have a bit of an understanding of like how we met.
Well, we met in law school. So that is like, 5 years ago, Addie?
It will be 6 this year. We met in 2017.
Yeah. And just going into our 1L year, we were already just becoming best friends and talking about how cool it would be to create a podcast together and talk about the criminal justice system. We were both interested in going into criminal law. And we've decided to revisit this idea and to really bring it to life with a couple of our favorite people helping us to make it happen.
Shout out to them.
Absolutely. Basically, we want to talk about topics pertaining to criminal defense. We want to talk about things that matter to us. Interesting cases that perhaps we've been dealing with, or, hypothetically, of course, or with enough anonymity to follow the ethical rules, which we're going to be talking about in one of our upcoming episodes. But basically, we just want to learn with each other. We want to explore these topics, and we want to bring you along for the ride.
I think it's important for us to talk about what that ride has been in terms of like, why now? Why now? And like what part of the ride has happened before we've just sat down and decided, okay, let's do a podcast. It's the right time for both of us. We have life experience and professional experience and just a really solid friendship to work in this space of just doing a creative project together. And I think that it's odd to just be like, oh, we're defense attorneys and not talk about the tremendous amount of effort that has taken to be in a place where we just want to feel like we have something to share. Right. And it's like, I mean, I think for us, it was like, well, I mean, maybe it would be beneficial to back up and like paint the picture in terms of all of the steps that it took to get to this point. Like maybe that would be helpful. So I mean, for us, like we became friends because we had all of our classes together, and you were the law student who I think had a pretty clear understanding of what you wanted to do. And you were the person that was really pointed with criminal defense, and you enjoyed criminal defense, and you, I think, were always on that track, and you were volunteering in those spaces in law school and stuff. And I think part of my story is that I liked criminal defense because I liked watching you do criminal defense. And I think that that story really like kicked off with we knew who each other were in law school, and we became friends in our criminal law class our 1L year. And I will never forget it. I came and sat next to you because I knew you in all my other classes, and I just thought you were really nice. And so I came and sat next to you, and I said, "Hey," and we hadn't had much of a conversation. And you looked at me and you were like, "Do you like murder?" And I said, in my head, I was like, this is an opportunity to make a friend. This is an opportunity to make a friend. And like this friendship, the outset and outcome of this friendship really hinges on how I answer this question. So I pulled myself together and I was like, I love murder. Do you? And you said, I think I said, I love murder. And you go, who's your favorite serial killer? And I go, Ted Bundy. And I think I have spent the past like 7 years trying to remember who you, I said Ted Bundy, you. And I think I've spent the past like 7 years trying to figure out who you responded with because you had some really obscure answer. And I was kind of like disturbed by the fact like, oh, she's going into the deep cuts of serial killer. Like this girl's hardcore. And then I was like, okay, like, I don't know if I handled that interaction properly. And you said, I have this book. I will bring it to you. Oh, no, you said, have you read this book? And I said, no. And then you said, I'll bring it to you. And I thought that that was kind of an odd thing too, because it wasn't like I've ever really met another person where their first inclination was to bring me a book. And sure as shit, you brought me the book the next day in class, and we've been friends ever since. And so, and that was like the kickoff of criminal law. And then I just remember back then, and I think it's, you know, a testament to your journey through all of this. You were really passionate about juvenile defense back in the day and mandatory minimums in the state of Oregon. And I kind of like got to watch you get all heated anytime that would come up. And you had been interning in the public defense office back in your hometown, I believe, right? You would go back and you would intern there. And so you were on this track to pursue public defense. And I didn't have that until later. And then now we work in this space together. And it's just a very cool full circle moment. And now that we're both working in criminal defense, it was finally like, oh, we both have landed the job, and we're now in the space that we talked about being in when we were in law school. And it was just not feasible at the time in law school to have a podcast. And now that we feel like we actually, I think, have a seat at the table of what that job is like, we're here. But yeah, I mean, you probably remember all of that differently. So if you want to talk about how you remember this part of the journey or anything that sticks out to you in terms of like your experience and how you got here, I don't want to be the person to speak about you just being this zealous, weird true crime junkie in law school who then took it very seriously and walked the walk and now is working in it. But that was my impression from the baby steps and fresh out the gate of how we got here.
Yeah. So number one, you really intimidated me. I felt like you were one of the cool kids in law school. And I've never really felt like a cool kid in any capacity.
Which is
so
crazy.
I found you to be a bit intimidating. You're so funny. And I don't know what the hell I was talking about with an obscure serial killer. Like, I definitely believe you, and that sounds like something I would do. But I must have just been like trying to impress you with my true crime knowledge or something, because Ted Bundy is definitely my favorite serial killer.
Same.
I don't know. Gosh, do you remember what book I brought you?
Yeah, and I have like lent it out to so many other people since that time. So it's gone through the passing of hands. But you brought me The Stranger Beside Me. And
Oh, hell yeah.
yeah, so you brought that to me, and that was like this weird kickoff to our friendship. It really was, I think, kind of like the perfect, I don't know, origin story for all of this, because it is a very much a true crime book. And you should probably speak about it since you were on your little book recommendation of bringing it to me. But it is written about Ted Bundy, but it's written from the perspective of somebody who actually knew him. And it also dives into a lot of the investigation into Ted Bundy and then like the subsequent offenses and how he ultimately was like held accountable in one state and not in another. And it's really like a deep dive into parts of that story from a personal standpoint, from an investigative standpoint, from kind of a piece of it that isn't glamorized in other media. And it was just really interesting. So yeah, that was the book you brought me. I still have it. I've lent it out to a bunch of people since. Now we're here.
It's fabulous. It's a must read. Anne Rule worked with Ted Bundy at a suicide hotline in Seattle. Yeah, like you were saying, it gives all of these different perspectives to the story, and specifically that kind of personal connection, which we don't really see anywhere else in these, documentary type coverages of the Bundy case. She talked about in the book, I remember, like, there was a point where she was discussing how, although it's true that he's taken all of these lives, like, she knows for sure that he saved lives at the suicide hotline. And I remember listening to an interview with her later.
Because she's gone on and she's written a lot of other books too, right?
Yeah. hmm One of like the most popular true crime authors of, I don't know, maybe of all time.
Well, I think that just circling back to something you had brought up earlier, you were talking about how you've recognized through your practice that you're really not so different from your clients.
Yeah.
And I really feel that. I really feel that, like, we can all fuck up, right? And I don't know, none of us really better than another. Like, we're all human. We all have these instincts and impulses. That's not to say people who commit terrible crimes like aren't deserving of punishment, but I guess more to say that, like, we are all human and subject to those types of, you know, human issues and impulses and lapses of judgment.
And I guess like I think for me too, just like off of that, Kayla, is like I think the thing that I've always loved about our friendship and what I hope that this podcast has to it is like we have always called each other when shit has hit the fan or something has not rubbed us right, or we just want to like talk about something that we have questions about or we find fascinating. And that hasn't changed. That was the way it was in law school. That's been the way that it has been in practice. And so I I want this space to be like we talk about something we agree on is like interesting or frustrating and unpack that. But also just like there's going to be days where we come in and sit down and like are talking about just work and what their working world is really like. And I'm like, hey, this is something that I'm experiencing as an attorney. This is like a learning experience I'm having as an attorney. And I don't think that there's a lot of that in this profession where it's like the honesty about like, this is a challenge I'm having. And it's like two friends that know what that's like, just talking about it. Because that is the thing that has been so cool about having a best friend that also chooses this really harsh area of practice as well. Because let's be honest, like when we talked about it last and we were talking about this job, since I'm a newer attorney than you, I think we agreed like being a criminal defense attorney, the highs are really high, the lows are really low, and everything else is fucking scary.
100%.
And that's I guess the short of it. Like this podcast is to just have a space where we learn and chat and have fun and have a space for other people that are drawn to this to feel like they're not alone, because that's why. I mean, I honestly don't think I would be here if I didn't have other friends that were also in criminal defense, because it's such an isolating thing. And so to have a spot where you can just be like two people that are sharing this communal thing, talking about it and learning about it and just reflecting on stuff, that's what we wanted to do. And now we're actually doing it. So
You've talked about like creating this space, and I love that. I mean, definitely attorneys and law students always want to put their best face forward, right?
always.
We don't want to show our vulnerability or our weaknesses. And that certainly translates into practice, right? Like you're trying to health, and certainly to your quote unquote adversaries, right? Like your opposing counsel, you don't want to seem like you don't have your shit together. So it is really hard, I think, for attorneys to be vulnerable. And we learn a lot in law school about just how vulnerable attorneys really are to major issues, right? Like with severe depression and anxiety and substance abuse problems. Like it's a hard profession and people really struggle. And so I really appreciate, you working with me together to just cultivate this space where we can all learn together and explore these different concepts.
And have fun and laugh through the mess.
For sure. We're also both women. We're young women.
Yeah.
Young from attorneys.
And the trend is like, having more female attorneys in my office and on the bench and everything. But it is nice having camaraderie in the space of being around other young female attorneys, that we are that wave and we're in it. And it's not like other people are swept up in it. So just debriefing what it's like when you feel intimidated or you feel those experiences, and just having like an honest space and talking about that with a friend who also gets it. And then, yeah, I just think that, I mean, in short, if you're here and you want to hang out with us, it's going to be a space of like two friends who are just being honest, talking about work and learning and commiserating and venting and trying to figure out the spaces that we want to make a difference in, because otherwise, why are we here?
So on the first season of Drinks with Defenders, Addie and I are going to explore 8 different topics pertaining to criminal defense. We're going to talk about interesting cases, our own experiences, and we're going to learn about these topics along with you. We're going to make them understandable, and we're going to make it so that these topics are not so intimidating, right? We want to demystify it and bring you on the journey with us. That being said, we are going to be launching a Patreon, details to come. We are going to be donating a percentage to help public defenders across our country who are in a real crisis right now. That's going to be the topic of one of our upcoming episodes. So thank you so much for coming along this journey with us. And we are excited to do it.
Also on our Patreon is the opportunity to support this team behind the podcast. Aside from supporting defenders, public defenders who are alongside Kayla and myself in this work, is the opportunity to support the team of this podcast. As we said, this podcast has been a dream for a very long time, and supporting us in making this something more long-term would allow for us to purchase things like equipment that would help make this experience better for everyone. I look forward to getting to know you and pouring drinks with all of you, and let's get into it.
So the first journey that Addie and I are going to take is the journey through legal ethics. This is one of Addie and I's favorite topics that we learned together in law school. We covered so many interesting cases, and attorney ethics are very nuanced, complicated, and to some, quite upsetting. So come along with us, pour yourself a drink, and let's get into it.
Cheers.